Luis, let me ask you, you've written a book about the middle class in Mexico. Has Mexican society changed? Have expectations changed? I mean, this that Sergio and Enrique have been talking about, I mean, are there different expectations from citizens of what they want from government and what they want from the state? And will that change things?
I'm not sure. There's all of us trained in political science in or around American academia tend to think that that Tocqueville's view of the U.S. in the 19th century is applicable to every form, and the civil societies in Europe have not shaped along the same lines as the American has, and I don't see any reason to expect that the Mexican will. Mexicans have, and the argument of that book is only that that economic stability has produced an opportunity for Mexicans to improve their lot, and that they have been moving along those lines. Not that incomes have increased significantly, or that simply that they have stability in their own families, that they can afford to do things that they couldn't do before. And in that sense, their aspirations and the like have moved in that direction. But if you see the polls tend to suggest that that same group of society is very reticent of the government, does not expect anything from the government, does not see the solution in government, but is not willing to risk anything to get there. And it turns it into a very conservative, not politically. Many of these people are I mean, the middle class is spread all over the political spectrum, but they are very conservative in economic terms and very conservative vis-a-vis the government.
Does this mean more entrepreneurial, or does it simply mean distrustful of government?
I think it's mostly distrustful of government, but many of the people who've arrived at that stage or at that threshold of economic, at that level of economic status, come from the informal economy. So these are people who are not only distrustful, but are openly against the government in at least that sense. So many people vote left, many people vote right. It has nothing to do with politics as such, but they would not entertain a government that would spend its way out of proportion, simply because that would kill their own status. So this is a part of society that is being attacked by crime, that is being undermined by crime. It is not the government today that is undermining them, it's crime. So it could become a very natural space for society for political movements to develop and grow. And I would believe, but this is simply my perception, not information, that some of the support that movements or caravans like the one that Sergio was just talking about are getting, at least the good vibes that they've been getting, have to do with people who are suffering just alike and see in this at least some call for something different.
Enrique, did you want to jump in on this, and then maybe Sergio, you can talk about the caravan?
Just that before every election, we prophesy that there will be abstention and that people don't care or distrust. But every election, including the midterm election, many people showed their. So I still think we have. I mean, the parties. I couldn't agree more with you how they have behaved in these 10 years. But I'm very, very disappointed, and nearly everyone is, except themselves, and even themselves. But people still go and vote. So, and I think when we go to the section of prophesying about who will win, and then or who will run and then who will win in this session, we can surely say that it will have a very strong civic and public participation.
Despite whatever distrust may be there.
Yeah, I think so.
Sergio, why don't you tell us a little bit about the caravan, and let's talk a little bit about insecurity in Mexico and citizen responses. We've been joined, I believe, by some people in Ciudad Juárez. Good to have you with us by video conference. Bienvenidos a los compañeros que están, los colegas que están en Ciudad Juárez, as well as other people in Washington and Mexico City and Monterrey and elsewhere joining us by video conference. Sergio, tell us, you've been involved in the caravana, so tell us a little bit about...
Yes, of course I am actively involved in the movement, as many other people. And it is, in a way, it's spontaneous, but it is not spontaneous as well. I mean, it's because it is the victims that came out, the people that have suffered, but also the orphans of democracy, all those that are not satisfied with democracy, like myself. I must say I am very unhappy. Now, what is the importance of the movement? If one takes numbers, in May 8, in Mexico City marched around 150,000 people. Whereas in Madrid, and I am taking Madrid as a comparison, only 30,000 people stayed at the moment in Plaza del Sol. So what does that mean? I don't know, but it's something that can become significant, because bringing 150,000 people to the streets, it has a political message. Second aspect, it is not individuals that are behind this movement, but it's also organizations. And what is more important, it is the plurality of the movement. Of course, the moral leader is Javier Cecilia, but the groups go from entrepreneurs, the private sector. So the former president of the Coparmex, the Confederación Patronal Mexicana, is actively involved, as civic groups related to the private sector, Sociedad en Movimiento, and of course there are also leftist groups. Therefore, the most remarkable thing is the plurality, the unity of the different. And why is the plurality? It has to do with the fact that the pact, the document that is going to be signed tomorrow, goes beyond the complaints and the demand of justice. It includes a demand for political reforms. It demands a change in the control that a corrupt teachers' union with the support of Felipe Calderón is holding on the education of Mexico. It includes many aspects. So the movement is not only about the victims, it is also about all those aspects of democracy that are not working. Now, the big question is if unity will prevail tomorrow or not. Yes, tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be signed the document for a few hundred organizations from all over the country, and that I don't know. I mean, because of course there are all sorts of positions from the extremes, extreme right, extreme left, that are pushing one way or the other. If unity prevails, then we do have a national movement of Mexico that will have a name that I still don't know, but it will be baptized by someone.
Not the Pope.
Not the Pope. Accidentally. Assuming that tomorrow unity prevail and that we sign the document without any major splits, which is something that nobody can say, then it comes the third act, because the ball goes to the field of the government and the political parties. Because the movement is going to ask the president and the leaders, the political elites, to meet with the movement in public, to discuss the agenda. And we go back to 68, to the question if how negotiations for political reform must be launched, in public or in private. And of course, we will see how Republican Democratic Felipe Calderón is vis-a-vis this demand. I hope that he and the leaders of the parties understand that we must find ways to sit down and find ways to start a serious reform that goes to the bottom, accountability, I mean, to the fight against corruption, corporativism, and all those things that are making insecurity looks worse in a way, or makes very difficult to fight insecurity. If the political elites, starting with the president, does not respond in an adequate way, or at least they show their willingness, I think that we will start a phase that can go until civil disobedience, and because I must say, I am one of those that are completely fed up with the corruption of these people.
What is the demand of the movement?
There are 6 demands that have to do with justice, of course, with the end of impunity, with the modification of the strategy to fight the cartels, but it also includes political reform that concretely has to do with the possibility of having citizens to be candidates, and then reform in the quality of education that has to do with the control that the teachers' union have of the education, and so on and so forth. There are 6 aspects that have to do with the pact, and that movement has nothing to do with election. It's independent. It's going to influence, and it's going to interact, but it's independent, so one must analyze it in its own terms.
Enrique, you've been somewhat critical about the movement initially, or at least skeptical.
No, not at all.
You want to jump into this, and we'll go to Luis?
I have supported it, and I have some doubts, particularly concerning the way their narrative concerning crime. But aside from that, the awakening of the conscience and the initiative and the participation of society, I have published 2 articles, and I will publish the 3rd this Sunday, supporting the leader in the movement, and it's a source of hope for me.
What would be your questioning on the narrative of crime? And then I'll ask you a second about the same.
I think the government has was the way the Calderón government faced the problem of crime was a set of decisions that were taken in haste, with not enough reflection, intelligence, planning. He went into a war with imprudence and with irresponsibility. But they are responsible, and they should be also, they are the government after all, and they are responsible for our security. But they are not to blame for that, because the blame is in the criminals. And very often, in the discourse of the left, they don't talk about the criminals. And the criminals are the criminals. And there is such thing as evil in the world. Yes, there is. And they are the ones that incarnate the evil. So I still wait for Javier and the movement to have, I would say, more than a narrative, which are the concrete steps and the alternatives that they propose. Okay, are they talking of taking out the army? Well, what? I personally think there are 10, 20 steps that I could think of in order, and there's not only one, but 20 or more steps in order to try to limit or control that problem. But I would like to see more concrete ideas. Among them, and we should talk about it, I think, a complete shift in the attitude and stance of Mexico vis-à-vis the United States, stating clearly that we are putting our people, the addictions are based here, but the deaths are placed there.
And the money is from here.
And the money and the arms. So the Mexican government and even the Mexican civic movement should have a much more fierce and strong position in the media in many ways, putting awakening the conscience of American people that they are very worried for Central America when they have guerrilla fighters and that, but listen, the neighbor is in flames and no one gives a damn, you know?
Luis, what can be done to reorient the strategy? I mean, what would be effective right now in dealing with organized crime?
Well, I fully...
Violence, which are two related but slightly separate problems. It depends how you define it, right? I mean, you both want to reduce the power of organized crime, but you also want to reduce the violence itself, which does great damage to citizens in Mexico.
I think there are goals, there are strategy, and there are means to get there. I think that the problem with Calderon was that he decided on a strategy before he defined the goals, and he did not convince the people of the goals because he didn't have them. And in fact, he's maintained the same strategy while changing the goals along the way, and that's no way to do it.
But what are the goals? What
well,
should they be?
The first one was to eradicate drug trafficking through Mexico. Now it is to fragment the cartels. The problem is that first, there being no proper, viable local police forces. Which he would have gone to the state police forces. There being none, there was no federal police force, so he ended up with the army. From that perspective, he took advantage of the only thing he had. I think he had to respond to the issue. I think that the issue was right. I think that Enrique is right. The problem of crime is there. And I believe that that's the problem of Mexico. It's not necessarily drugs. The problem is that we have no police and judicial structures that can work. We have a problem of impunity that is eating up, is corroding Mexican society deeply. So even if drugs disappeared, which would remove obviously a lot of money and means for the criminals, but even if that disappeared, the problem of crime would not disappear. In fact, the first wave of crime, of organized crime that Mexico experienced in the 1990s had to do with stolen auto parts and then with pirated goods and the like. So it had nothing to do with drugs or with the firepower that drugs come associated with. So the problem of Mexico, I think, is deep down, is a problem of governing structure, of impunity, of capacity to deal with this kind of situation. What Calderon said he would be doing was that he was confronting the narcos, forcing them to first relinquish some areas of the country that had been taken over, particularly along the border. And interestingly enough, that is a 9/11 phenomenon, because the U.S., as it hardened the border, it forced the Mexican cartels to develop a physical presence along the border, which they did not have before, at least not fundamentally. And the second thing he said he would do was to create a police structure that would be able to counter and replace the army eventually in those places. Well, the development, the police force has grown, but not to the size and level that it should have been. They said 100,000 individuals. Now it's only 30,000. And the second criticism I would have is that, and in this I would like to talk more with Enrique, but I believe that without a proper, strong local police and judicial force at the local level, they will never change. Because even if some functions are centralized, Mexico is so big now, so decentralized and so diverse, that we need strong local governments that are accountable. And that there's been absolutely no effort to develop that capacity at that level. So I don't believe that the diagnosis is not that complicated. There are some competing views among critics and academics and the like, but the fundamental issues are strengthening the federal police force, strengthening local governments, and diminishing understanding that the narcos, the only thing they wanted, at least in Mexico, they traditionally wanted that was money, not political power, and I'm not certain that this strategy has not forced them to that. Is to diminish the level of violence, not by simply removing the army, but by forcing them into to establishing rules like the Americans or the Spanish do, which is strong enough rules to force them into a channel, which is what happened in Mexico. I don't believe that there was any negotiation with the narcos in the pre-era. What happened was that the government was strong enough to impose rules on them to behave in a given way, which is what happens in the U.S. The U.S. obviously tolerates the drugs as long as there is no violence, as long as there are no spillover effects into other functions. The best example was when this ICE man was killed in Zacatecas, I think.
In San Luis Potosí.
In San Luis Potosí. The next day, literally the next day, 656 of members of that same band in the U.S. were immediately apprehended. I mean, the Mexican government does not have that information about Mexico. The U.S. knew exactly who these people were and where they were. The response was so overwhelming, so brutal, that it tells a lot. It's not that the U.S. is incapable of doing it, it simply tolerates it as long as they don't break the rules. They broke the rule, here's the punishment.
Then they bring down necessary force to reestablish an equilibrium. Sergio, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, it's also a question of money, of business, Luis. It's a big business to sell drugs and to sell weapons to Mexico, and that's why the federal government tolerates the criminal smuggling of weapons to Mexico. Just one comment about President Calderón's policy. I think he doesn't know how to relate to criticism, how to incorporate criticism into the security policy, because there is an excess of expertise in Mexico and knowledge about what's going on, and it's simply that he doesn't know or he doesn't want to incorporate those ideas. And perhaps what exemplifies better is the speech he gave here last month at the Council of the Americans. In page 4 he said, I am willing to dialogue about legalization of marijuana. On page 6, he clarified, but I won't change my policy. So what is the point of dialogue, of establishing a dialogue? And that happens with that policy. He started his policy in 2006, and it was until August 2010 that he opened a public dialogue to listen what society, an expert, have to say about the war on drugs.
Was there a change after the dialogue?
No.
Let's go, if we can shift a little, because we do want to get to your questions and comments here. What's going to happen in the future in Mexico? I mean, what will happen with violence? What's going to happen with the elections coming up next year?
His prophet also.
You know, yes, historian and prophet here.
Now we come to the easy part.
Easy, right? Yeah.
The difficult part was the past. Now we're talking about the shining future, no?
Right, exactly.
A friend of mine, a late writer, Alejandro Rossi, used to say that politics is the fastest theater on earth, politics. And Mexican theater is one of the fastest. So one thing I can say, that's why I say that it's very easy, is that anything can happen. And when I say anything, I really truly mean anything. We all have our bets or our ideas of what will happen, but the only thing I want to say is that the three parties have an internal predicament, their predicaments, their crises, their uncertainties. And nothing can be said, it could even happen that the front runners will actually run, and then the front runner of those candidates will win, but anything can happen. The main thing is that, I think it would be interesting to discuss that the main currents of political thought and life in Mexico, PAN, PRD, and the PRI, truly represent different points of view and of what the reforms should be, and the elections are, it's obvious, but they are very important. But the parties have to come to terms with themselves, and each one of the parties, the PRI, the PAN, and the PRD, have their own problems within themselves, not only in how to choose the candidate, but where to lead the party and what vision, if any, they have of Mexico's future.
Are these visionary parties?
I wouldn't go that far.
That was a softball there. That was a...
That shiny.
Sergio, you got any predictions for us?
No, because I really think for me it's not the most relevant aspect. It is more relevant to start to study if these elections are going to be more irregular than the ones of 2006, if the irregularities that have advanced, as it seems to be the case. Because every local election you see how the electoral laws are more broken and more cynically broken. In the state of Mexico now, it is the last example was a public compromise of one leader, former leader of the PRD with the candidate of the PRI, by which the leader of the PRD promised to deliver 140,000 votes in exchange for sort of a ministry, I don't know how you call it in the state of Mexico, that is going to be created for the benefit of the leader. So that's the level of corruption that we are witnessing, and that's public, with electoral authority just observing how votes are bought and traded. And I am afraid that that's going to be the case at the federal level, because I don't see the Electoral Institute with the will, the power to impose the ethical standards that will clean the election. So, but I don't know who is going to win under those circumstances. PRI, I suppose.
But is that something that you want the Electoral Institute to impose? I mean, that sounds like a question of personal. That should be punished by the voters rather than by the Electoral Institute.
I'm sorry, there is a law. There is a law that is very clear about. Corporative voting is forbidden by the law. Period. If you want to abide by the law or not, that's another question. That has to do with the Electoral Institute. And that's what...
Buying a vote specifically.
Of course, this is a...
But politicians can make any promise they want.
This is a pact, I mean, exchange of votes by a position. I mean, it's a trade. I mean, it's so open, it's so obvious, it's so corrupt that it goes against the spirit and the letter of the law.
Please, your...
I know that's part of the problem of having laws that are totally useless and that are unenforceable because they don't match the reality of the country.
Yeah.
And they are also aspirational rather than real. I think there's a reason to be more optimistic, or at least there are reasons to be more optimistic. One of them is that surely I don't see society changing reality in the short term. I hope that there will be a strong social movement that would be willing to talk, negotiate with also a competent leadership on the other side. The only source of optimism that I could bring to bear is that I believe that the three individuals that I think are electable may or may not be candidates, but the three that are electable, each of us here in this room may like or dislike, that's a different story. And they are not necessarily good in what they aim, but those three have much more experience as managers of complex tasks, as negotiators, as politicians in general, than the three last presidents, Cedillo, Fox, or Calderón. And I'm talking about Ebrard, I'm talking about Peña, and I'm talking about Vázquez Mota. I think that the three are the only three electables. And I think the three have experience that is much more different and much more serious and relevant than any of the three previous ones. If that's true, then I think there are reasons to be optimistic about the possibility of a different future. Meaning by that we would have at least competent politicians in charge, whether they would have a better strategy, a better program, whether they will be willing to negotiate their way with X or Y or Z that each one here of us would approve or not, that's a different story.